Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, December the 1st, 2021. So, Omicron, is it the greatest threat in the world, or is it basically nothing at all? We seem to be hearing both. Here is a piece by Adam Piggott, author and gentleman adventurer, on his blog pushingrubberdownhill.com. Omicron is their get out of jail free card. When I first heard of the rise of the new and terrifying Omicron variant, my eyes rolled with total exasperation at yet another package of lies that they were trying to sell us to continue this grand charade of theirs that has all but run out of steam. But a few days into the new spin cycle, my detective antenna began to go up, not with alarm, but with positive interest, for I was detecting an element of hope that we may be finally on the verge of triumph, at least in this battle. Hang on a second. One would have thought that after all this time, I'd have the startup procedure down pat, but apparently not. Adam Piggott continues. The initial media reports and government reactions to this third variant were full of suitable hysteria, the same type of full throttle propaganda that has been the hallmark of the past 18 months. Flights were canceled from countries in southern Africa, while the media was positively breathless as they luxuriated in yet another episode of their beloved fear porn. But then the message began to change. First, we had credible reports out of Botswana from health authorities that this was an extremely mild version of the virus. The WHO backed this up with an official announcement. Then the media began to change its tune to one of muted caution that this new variant could offer natural immunity, not all the media across the board, but certainly to a noticeable extent. Certainly not in Canada, though, and I will get to that later. It was an extraordinary turnaround in a very short time. So what gives? The other day, I wrote that the globalists were in a position of holding a losing hand after a deceptively strong start. My outtake was that they would continue to double down in futile efforts to extract a winning hand, but I had not considered the possibility that they would attempt to fold without losing credibility. Consider the nation of Austria. The government's actions, which include mandatory vaccination for the entire population from February, are now causing the police and military to turn against it. What if the Austrian government fell, not to the opposition, but to a genuine revolution of the people? What sort of cascading effect would such an event have on the rest of the world? Most likely, it would be dominoes. This is but one example. The globalists were confident that the people were sufficiently divorced from spirituality and wedded to the world of materialism to bow down to their plans under threat of losing it all. That has not eventuated. Instead, millions upon millions of people around the world are refusing to kowtow to the authorities. Just today, there was the expiry of a mandate in Western Australia that fly in, fly out workers would have to be vaxxed. Instead, workers are descending en masse to the state parliament to leave their work uniforms on the steps of the building in protest. This is not how they expected it would go. And so too Omicron. What if we gave you a variant that gave you natural immunity and made everyone safe? That meant we could quietly leave all of this lockdown and mask wearing behind us so that everyone could go back to their lives and live happily ever after. And we will just quietly forget about all that vaccine stuff and hope that the long-term effects aren't as bad as we fear. And we will withdraw back into our gnome holes in the Swiss Alps and scheme further in the hopes that next time we will get it right. That's what my gut is telling me. The Omicron variant is their attempt at a get-out-of-jail-free card. Of course, I may be entirely wrong. But if I'm right, I have a question for everyone. Which way do you want to play it? Do you want to go quietly back to the way things were before, or do you want to hang them high? I mentioned this before, but I'll repeat that I'm rather astonished at how the Biden administration, well, whatever administration it is, has reacted to this. Oh, we saw last year that Trump showed some courage on this and then folded after, the typical elite pressure, bullying, blackmail. You remember he wanted to draw a line under COVID on Good Friday of last year. So instead, he went to the vaccine variant and declared warp speed, and the vaccines were ready, well, before the election. The drug companies suppressed knowledge of this because they wanted Trump to lose. So I thought that after Biden was inaugurated, what he would say was, hey, we've got the vaccines now, and he wouldn't give Trump any credit for it. So we're going to start winding this down. Instead, he went in the completely opposite direction, and it is not looking good for him because this is just a spectacular own goal. Oh yes, the COVID-19 and everything that followed from it was Donald Trump's fault, entirely Donald Trump's fault. But now Biden owns it. It's going, and more people have died of or with COVID under the Biden administration than they did under the Trump administration. So, this is from Chris Smith at the Times of London. COVID-19 will just end up causing a cold, says Oxford vaccine creator Sarah Gilbert. The new coronavirus is unlikely to mutate into a variant that can evade vaccines because there aren't many places for the virus to go, the creator of the Oxford jab has said. Dame Sarah Gilbert, speaking yesterday in a Royal Society of Medicine webinar, played down fears of a more deadly new variant. We normally see that viruses become less virulent as they circulate more easily, and there is no reason to think that we will have a more virulent version of SARS-CoV-2, she said. And oh, yes, things are looking very ugly indeed in Australia, as the Washington Post reports. This is from Michael E. Miller and Francis Vinal. One state leader was threatened with beheading over his vaccine mandate, another was hanged in effigy, and a federal lawmaker who defended vaccination requirements was doxxed by a colleague, leading to a torrent of abuse. For over a year, Australia managed to avoid many of the divisions that tore its countries hit harder by the pandemic. People reluctantly accepted temporary intrusions on their freedoms. Well, some of them did, including contact tracing and lockdowns. Isn't it funny that we don't hear anything about contact tracing anymore? That seems to have been a bust right from the beginning, designed to squelch a Delta outbreak and protect their fellow citizens. But that unity has begun to fray as states lift restrictions and life returns to normal for the almost 90% of eligible Australians who are fully vaccinated. The holdouts find themselves barred from cafes, bars, restaurants, gyms, pools, and other non-essential venues. Yes, non-essential to whom? A small but highly visible anti-vaccine movement routinely shuts down city centers with protests, some of which have turned violent, and has trained its anger on politicians who have supported vaccine mandates. While only a handful of people have been arrested for threats against lawmakers, experts say the incidents underline growing polarization. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a sense that the nation was pulling together as one to face off against a common challenge, said Michelle Grossman, an expert in violent extremism at Deakin University. All that is gone now. Judith Brett, professor of Australian politics and history at La Trobe University, said she could not recall previous protests with this level of anger and violence. In the wake of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and the October killing of a member of the British Parliament, by a Muslim extremist, the threats of, but Washington Post doesn't want to mention that. The threats have rattled Australian politicians and led authorities to increase their protection. It's a stark change from a year ago when Australia appeared to have quashed the virus and vaccinations were still months away. There was political solidarity as well as community solidarity, Grossman said. Both began to crumble this year as much of the country endured months-long lockdowns amid an outbreak of the Delta variant. State leaders took swipes at one another with their responses, and anti-lockdown protests drew thousands to downtown Sydney and Melbourne. Instead of fizzling out as vaccination rates soared and states lifted lockdowns, the protests have continued and at times grown more menacing. In Melbourne, where Victoria State Premier Daniel Andrews has pushed for pandemic legislation to replace expiring emergency orders, protesters have compared him to Hitler and hanged him in effigy. One man was recently arrested after encouraging protesters to bring guns and shoot the premier. A lawmaker leading talks on the legislation said she received 70,000 emails, including death and rape threats. Another got an envelope containing a used condom and a note to enjoy a sexually transmitted disease. Some threats have had a performative aspect that reflects social media's influence, Grossman said, citing nooses and gallows that echo the U.S. Capitol attack. It just seems to have been imported from America, Brett said. Oh, really? No violent protests in political history before January 6th? No use of nooses as symbols? What nonsense. Australia's COVID restrictions, meanwhile, have become the target of conservative American pundits, forming an international far-right feedback loop. I thought we were all supposed to be globalists now. Some of the anger in Australia appears rooted in fears that it's becoming a two-tier society as states open up, but only for the vaccinated. Well, perhaps it's simply a change in the politics, a profound change. A return to what Georges Sorel wrote about violence in politics, because politics had always been attended by violence until, I don't know, roughly 100 years ago or so, when it became practically universally believed that the state should have a monopoly of violence. And, let's see, who is in today's slot for fully vaccinated yet COVID infected? Why, that would be LeBron James, King James of the LA Lakers. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Anrun, Dawn from Beyond, Yo Mama, Anrun, Red Sulfur, Dan, Chogokin666, hello to Professor Paul, Kakwa Paravaitya, Palcaso 88. Anrun says this is the greatest threat until the next greatest threat. Hello to Dionysus. What about Domicron? Am I right? This is Chogokin at 666. Red Sulfur says they should have used Omega, but I suspect it was shelved for being too apocalyptic. Hello to Sam B, to Oscar Toe. Red Sulfur asks, why don't they start using the Hebrew alphabet? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Don from Beyond says, I can't usually watch live, but I never miss an episode of the KMG Show. Kevin, you are still my favorite internet guy. Thank you very much for your kind words. Hello to Gamion and Quachalango. And who is Kevin reading? Well, the initial essay was by a fellow called Adam Pigott. And you can find his website easily enough. Red Sulfur says we can all intone JS Bach's cantata Ich habe genug. Oscar Toe says, I keep seeing a new world leader that is twice as evil as the last world leader. This New Zealand prime minister will be hard to beat. What a real crone. Red Sulfur says, as they say in German, Ich habe die Nase voll. My nose is full. True Greenberry says, it wasn't just a drama between Biden and Trump. This is global, bigger players in this game than mere presidents. Sam B says, never ever to detract from KMG, but I also very much respect the 9-minute news shows of clear tax value. Oscar Toe says, there's no way possible that more people have died this year. We have the vaccine. No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania says, we're in the finale of the Golem fable, and the more berserk it gets, the closer we are to the resolution. Palcaso 88 says that Jacinda Ardern looks and sounds like she escaped from the loony bin and somehow got herself elected Prime Minister of New Zealand. No, I'm not going to imagine that. Not much profit in a free contact tracing app, says True Greenberg. Hello to David the Gnome. And hello to Justin Proto, who says, seems like Eric Zemmour will give Macron a serious challenge. Well, one can only hope. Ashley Man Bravo, hello. Luke Ford published a video on his YouTube channel in a small room with bunk beds, mockingly saying he's stuck in a concentration camp in Australia. I'll have something on that shortly. Red Sulfur says, time to rewatch the Andromeda Strain. And hello to Emma Nimpton, who says, I hope you're right with regard to what No Sleep had to say. Oh, Red Sulfur says, instead of comatose, I feel a covidose. And, oh, yes, how are we taking this Omicron business in Canada? Not good. Not good. Susan Delacourt, who is about the closest thing to received political wisdom in my country, writes in the Toronto Star, Canadians are finished with COVID-19, but Omicron is just getting started. It's too soon to tell what damage the new Omicron variant of COVID-19 will do to the physical or economic health of Canadians, but all signs are pointing already to a large looming morale crisis, which politicians are going to have to struggle to contain in the days and weeks ahead. Just when Canadians were starting to plan holiday gatherings and winter trips to sunnier climes and a long-awaited return to normal, the threat looms again of more lockdowns and renewed travel restrictions. You'll have to forgive me for wondering if Susan Delacourt is not looking forward to more lockdowns and renewed travel restrictions. So what does the political class have left in its arsenal after nearly 2 years of this pandemic to head off what could be the biggest wave yet of COVID-19 fatigue? Oh, is that what we're suffering from now? Oh, it's not the extinction of our ancient liberties. It's not the destruction of our economies. No, it is COVID fatigue. Is that like chronic fatigue syndrome then? I suspect that it is, actually. New polling by Abacus Research shows that COVID-19 anxiety has skyrocketed in the past few days, fueled merely by the emergence of Omicron. No, fueled entirely by media panic porn. 4 in 10 adults say they are becoming more worried about the pandemic over the past few days, almost doubling the response to the same question a month ago. Manufactured consent, they call it. The anxiety has landed with accompanying gloom about the future. A full 28% of Canadians now believe the worst of COVID-19 is still to come. Roughly the same, 26% reported to Abacus they thought the worst of the pandemic was over. ECOS polling is unearthing the same disturbing trends. The World Health Organization is calling for calm and rational response to Omicron. And it was striking to watch politicians and public health officials trying this week to anticipate the mental health consequences of this latest turn in the long COVID-19 saga. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, maybe the politician who has been most damaged through the pandemic, addressed the mood problem directly when he spoke late on Monday. While this news is, I know, frustrating for us all, Omicron should not cause people to despair, Kenney said. In Canada, the federal government waited until later Tuesday afternoon to give its full update on the Omicron situation, tightening testing rules for travelers and banning entry for anyone who has traveled through Nigeria, Malawi, and Egypt. Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos also floated the possibility that travel rules could change quickly and that some thought is being given now to the timing of when Canadians may need booster shots. May need, huh? The federal government has been monitoring the social and psychological fallout of COVID-19 through a special behavioral science unit since the pandemic began. No, nothing sinister about that. Its tracking has shown that the government has only limited ability to alter the mood or outlook of the public. What a shame. The trust and assurances from public officials has declined steadily over the pandemic. So it isn't clear just how much Canadians will listen to any reassurances or calls for calm from the elected class, especially as more polls show that nerves are shot. How about the unelected class, eh? How about the latrine wallahs who have taken over our lives? What is the trust in these people? And professional worrier Glenn Pearson writes for National Newswalk, in politics, nothing happens by accident, and if it happens, you can bet it was planned that way, noted Franklin Roosevelt. Golly, he sounds like a conspiracy theorist, doesn't he? Well, maybe not this time. Just as political jurisdictions across Canada and around the world believed they could see the end of the COVID tunnel and get their programs and economies back to a workable level, fate has struck again. Welcome to the politics of stages. First, it was the era of coronavirus. Just as it appeared that our political and healthcare leaders were getting under control, the Delta variant appeared seemingly out of nowhere to send us back to masks, social distancing, and a tightening of public policy. But by October, there was the sense that Canada had finally got on top of that as well, leaving us to be informed that a world without masks was possible as early as March. Oh, thank you, government. Good thing, too, since the anti-vaxxer movement seemed to be getting entrenched. In some locations in Europe, the rebellion seemed to be gaining the upper hand. Oh, dear. Yet overall, there was this sense that the health crisis had perhaps peaked. All this has proved to be a nightmare for politicians of all stripes and the political class in general. That's a shame. There was always this quiet despair they harbored that the virus might not be contained. For all their dedicated efforts at supporting their citizens and organizations, yes, by destroying society and the economy. That's how our governments have supported their citizens and organizations. An outburst of the Delta variant would burst on the scene in the West, the East, the North, and the Prairie provinces, and now the next stage, Omicron. Well, the cases are few in Canada. We have been through this before twice, and on both of those occasions, our politics, economy, and social order were disrupted once again. By whom? Enough with the passive language. Though not admitting to it in public, numerous MPs, MPPs, and civic representatives wonder if society is about to be restricted once more should Omicron upend the bulk of the advances made during the Delta stage. Yes, forgive me. Forgive me if I, toy with the possibility that Glenn Pearson is, how shall I say, enjoying this. And this is from Summit News, Steve Watson. And Anthony Fauci and Barack Obama spontaneously turned up at an elementary school in Washington, D.C. to watch and encourage kids to get vaccinated Tuesday. Oh, spontaneous, was it? The pair surprised students at Kimball Elementary School, where a pop-up vaccination clinic was set up. Then they spoke about how all children should get vaccinated with the experimental mRNA COVID shots because science. Yes. This is straight out of Todd Browning's horror classic, Freaks. We accept you, one of us, gobble, gobble. You get the vax, then you can become a member of society. If you don't, well, no, that's out. In related news, or somewhat related news, creepy Chris Cuomo has been suspended indefinitely from CNN. But isn't there a fellow legal commentator on CNN who was discovered to be masturbating during a Zoom call, and they let him back? What does it take to get fired from CNN? And let's go to WMBriggs.com. William Briggs, statistician to the stars. He has a new book out, which is called Everything You Believe Is Wrong, the book All Woke Fear. And if you go to his site, you will find that he has provided free, both in the text of this post or as a PDF, the first chapter of his book. And I'm going to read from some of it. A good beginning. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the book that proves everything you believe is wrong. Well, not everything. Only the most important things. If you are in the majority, then a great deal of what you hold true about the world and of life is false. Let's be careful with the title. It's not what you know that is wrong, but what you believe. This is because you can only know what is true. You can never know what is false, but you can believe anything. By majority, I do not necessarily imply a numerical body count, I mean the bulk of those who hold power issue the opinions we know we ought to agree with even when we don't. The majority includes county to federal level bureaucrats and government officials, nearly every individual in the media and politics, the students and professors at all but a handful of universities, those ascendant in business and the professions, those who run almost every so-called non-governmental and professional organization, and nearly all intellectuals. In short, everybody important, our elite, our experts, our rulers. In the USA, the majority includes those calling themselves Democrats or Republicans, liberals or conservatives, even in many cases religious and non-religious. In other areas of the Western world, the labels differ, but the attitudes and beliefs shared by the majority are much the same. The majority is steeped in modernity, in materialism, inequality, diversity, wokeism, critical theories of various sorts, in weird ideas like nominalism, in scientism, in the here and now, and in the love of self and money, and in the hatred of the minority, those without power. Some, well used to hearing the start of these kinds of debates, will say the division is between Democrats and Republicans, or liberals and conservatives. Yet traditional political parties and cultural distinctions have nothing to do with our great divide. Below, I will argue the true fracture is between debased and based. And here's some things. He has many controversial opinions. William Briggs does. A consensus among elite academics does not prove the belief of the elite academics is true. That you were offended is irrelevant to whether a proposition is true or false. Hypocrites are sometimes the best judges. If animals have rights, they have responsibilities too. Equality is false and undesirable. Diversity is our weakness. Equity is destructive. Here are more. There are no such thing as gays. There are no such things as transsexuals either. Defining yourself as your sexual desire is nonsensical. Voting does not make the majority position right and the minority position wrong. Voting is a leading cause of discord. Democracy is rarely to be desired. The commonness of a behavior is not proof the behavior is moral. It is impossible not to be judgmental or to not discriminate or even to not try to impose one's beliefs. That, or if certain apes copulate freely, is no reason that men should copulate freely. Screaming bigot is never an argument. Miracles happen. You cannot choose to believe. You do not have free will. That because our top minds cannot think of another reason for some phenomenon, like free will, does not prove there is no reason. God exists. I am not a conservative, William Briggs declares. The word conservative might have suggested itself as a way to describe yours truly as you read. This is wrong. I am most anxious to correct this false impression. I am not a conservative. I am based. You ought to be too. Some of you might know that the recent neologism based was formed by shaving the first two letters from debased to form a new word meaning the opposite of debased, thus completing the pair of a formerly unpaired word, as in gruntled from disgruntled. Based is everything, debased is not. I want you to be based. The purpose of this book is to guide you in that direction. If not, convert you. Screaming racism is debased. Embracing race is debased. Equality is debased. Difference is based. Cowardice and effeminacy are debased. Bravery, masculinity, and femininity are based. Unthinking atheism is debased. Worship of God is based. Ignorance and denial of the nature of things is debased. Understanding of the limits implied by nature is based. Oligarchy is debased. Liberty is based. Woke is debased. Aware is based. And once again, you can find, there's much more. You can find the first chapter in William Briggs's new book, Everything You Believe is Wrong, the book All Woke Fear, at wmbriggs.com. So what are the latest numbers from Ontario, Canada's most populous province? 780 new COVID-19 cases, 6 more deaths. And who are these people who have been newly infected? Well, it's pretty much 50-50 as to vaxxed and unvaxxed. 369 are unvaccinated, 24 have received 1 dose, 336 are fully vaccinated, and 51 have an unknown vaccination status. And yes, some debased people are fully embracing medical technological tyranny. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Footage out of Sweden shows people willingly having COVID vaccine passports placed onto implantable microchips in their hands. Yes, really. The chips started out as a convenience fad. Those with an implant can open doors without keys, pay without cash, carry gym memberships, and ID without cards and wallets. And so naturally, why not have their precious COVID vaccination status applied to the implantable chip too, so they can participate in society? One of Sweden's most popular newspapers, Aftonbladet, reports, get your COVID certificate in a chip in your hand or elsewhere under the skin. It is increasingly popular to insert a chip into the body with different types of information, and now you can insert your COVID certificate in the chip. Yes, something to look forward to. And let's go to this Substack called Eugipius. And yes, he talks about conspiracies. And he says there isn't one plan, there are 50,000 and nobody is in charge. And I'll just remind you all again that Alex Berenson's book Pandemia is out. And let's go to conservativewoman.co.uk. And there is an essay here from Kate Dunlop today. After 20 months of misery and lies, enough is enough. We want our lives back. The past 20 months have been shocking, regrettably, from what we have heard this week from our faux bumbling prime minister and his array of grotesque bag carriers. There is more to come. Uppermost among the many great assaults that have been inflicted on us is the forced realization of just how fragile our way of life is. Our previously comfortable, open, and relatively free society has been disrupted by a nascent totalitarian state that seeks draconian control over how we act, think, and feel. As Joni Mitchell sang, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone? The most depressing truth of all is that many people, the majority in fact, appear unable or unwilling to recognize just how much has changed, how much has been taken from us, just what is gone. Democracy, nothing less, has been beaten and left bloodied, awaiting the coup de grace to be delivered by our government. And she appends a link to the UN definition of democracy just out of morbid curiosity. The population has been mesmerized by the monotonous, repetitive siren voices accompanying the Great Convulsion. Every government, every spokesman for the national health scene with little or no challenge and tangential connection to the truth. There has been almost total unanimity of message, sinister programs scripted. Even today, as we face another cut to our civil liberties, no alternative is permitted media time. Therefore, it does not exist. Anyone who puts their head above the parapet to question the dominant narrative is accused and found guilty of being a COVID denier, a conspiracy theorist, and a purveyor of deadly misinformation. Isn't it funny that these words misinformation and disinformation were spoken relatively rarely up until 18 months ago, 20 months ago? And it's quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say, that you can't go through a single day without hearing both these terms and apparently being guilty of disseminating misinformation, or even worse, disinformation is a crime more serious than, I don't know what, murder? And our author concludes, Hidden in the excitement of 14 cases of Omicron nationally, our jailers have reduced the gap between jabs and boosters to 3 months. How does that make any sense? Yes, regularly quarterly predictable income and increased profit flows for our chums at Pfizer. As the American journalist and cultural critic H.L. Mencken said in 1918, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. Coming up to number 2, we reject this latest fantastic set of lies. We want our future back, Mr. Johnson, not the immiseration and oppression that you envision for us. The jig is up. We see through your game. Actually, Eugippius was making the point a few days ago on his Substack about the rise of what he calls the laptop class. These are the people who make the decisions for us. And I suppose one of the benefits of the COVID madness is that it exposed the emptiness of the laptop class. They have nothing interesting to say about any subject. And it really seems as if every morning, I don't know, maybe about 5 a.m., a memo goes out to all of these people. Here are the talking points we want you to push today. I mean, it really seems like that because this incredible unanimity, one might have imagined, once again, that the disappearance of our most basic liberties all around the world would be controversial. It would be controversial even in the regime media, but not a bit of it. And let's go to dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. And boozy Downing Street party was COVID safe, insists Boris Johnson. I don't think anyone is safe after Boris has had a few. Certainly not the ladies. And what is Omicron variant is a mild mutation and governments must drop the hysteria, says the World Health Organization. But wait, they're the experts, right? And in our Advance Australia Fair file, 3 people who escaped a COVID quarantine compound, or AKA concentration camp, in northern Australia by climbing over the perimeter fence have been found and arrested after the Australian authorities launched a manhunt to capture those who broke out, which involved setting up police checkpoints and conducting vehicle searches. The trio had all tested negative for COVID the day before they snuck out of the facility. According to RT, on Wednesday, police alleged that 3 people had scaled the perimeter fence of the compound in order to break out of the facility situated near Darwin in the Northern Territory. Police say the trio escaped the Center for National Resilience just before 4:40 a.m. What is there a motto when you enter the Center for National Resilience? Is there a motto posted there? Perhaps vaccines will make you free? Officers had set up checkpoints and were inspecting cars in the area in an attempt to find the absconders. The 3 were swiftly caught and taken into custody. Police and staff at the Center for National Resilience are currently confirming the absconders' identities prior to releasing further information. Officials did not confirm whether the inmates were returning travelers or local citizens who had been put into quarantine. According to the BBC, the center has been used in recent days to house people infected with COVID from an outbreak in Catherine, a town 185 miles away. The Howard Springs site can hold up to 2,000 people. It is situated within an old mining camp, which was turned into a quarantine center by the Australian government in August. The 3 individuals arrested had tested negative for COVID Tuesday. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, has said that it is potentially time to think about how we can have mandatory vaccination within the European Union. Although von der Leyen reiterated that member states can decide their own COVID response measures, including whether to make vaccination compulsory, she spoke of her concern that 1/3 of Europeans, roughly 150 million, are currently unjabbed, which she claims is carrying an enormous health cost. Yes, and remember, people, that we all must get vaccinated. Why? To protect the vaccinated. Okay? I mean, what could be more sensible than that? Did lockdown make us fat? And there is a picture of a cheeseburger here. Could be. Oh, it's got bacon. Looks delicious. Unlike the Swiss or Japanese, we British are not known for our health. After Malta, in fact, we're the most obese nation in Europe. Fully 28% of us have a BMI greater than 30, which for a man of 5'10" equates to a body weight of 96 kilos. This should be a source of national embarrassment, and you'd assume the government wouldn't want to make it any worse, which prompts the question, what on earth did they expect lockdown would do? Back in March 2020, we were told that we must stay at home. Only one form of exercise a day would be allowed under the new regime. Gyms and sports clubs were closed, and children's play areas were cordoned off like crime scenes. This was all in spite of the emerging evidence that the chance of being infected outdoors was negligible. The full effects of lockdown on our waistlines are only now becoming apparent, and they're not pretty. In a recent study, Fei Bu and colleagues analyzed data from the COVID-19 social study, a longitudinal survey of British adults that began at 21st March 2020. Note, the sample was not representative, so the researchers applied weights throughout their analysis. During the initial phase of the study, up to the end of August, respondents were asked about their level of physical activity on a weekly basis. In particular, they were asked how much exercise they'd done on the last working day. Although the series begins after the start of lockdown, the percentage of people reporting no physical activity increased substantially over the duration of the study, from around 23% to almost 40%. Oddly, the peak of inactivity was not reached until the late summer. If the government's messaging had not needlessly emphasized staying at home, it's plausible this change could have been avoided. In a recent meta-analysis, the majority of studies reported decreases in physical activity and increases in sedentary behaviors during lockdown. Hardly surprising, you might say, but it's good to have hard data. I have read that if one takes a walk, that's a continuous walk of 30 minutes or more every day, then one's chances of dying of a heart attack or stroke are substantially reduced. Perhaps that is a message that our governments could disseminate if they really cared about our health. We all know that there is a birth dearth around the world, with some exceptions, but certainly everywhere in the Western world, also in Japan, South Korea, and other places. This is from Nicole Lynn Pesci at Market Watch. Young adults worry it's morally wrong to have children, Earth Day study finds. Global warming and climate change are having a chilling effect on family planning. Young adults say that concerns over climate change and uncertainty about the future of the planet influence their reproductive decision-making, according to a new University of Arizona study. The peer-reviewed report interviewed 24 adults ages 18 to 35 who said that climate change, aka the significant large-scale change in average weather patterns, such as conditions becoming warmer, wetter, or drier over 7 decades or more, does indeed play an important role in deciding whether or not to have kids. How is it possible? Unless, the temperatures go, that they slip down to, zero on a daily basis, or go up to 100 on a daily basis, how are people going to notice these subtle changes? They claim that they notice that it is very slightly warmer. I don't believe it. The most common concern in the new report was over consumption, with the Gen Z and millennial respondents worrying about how their children would contribute to climate change by adding to the carbon footprint, as well as overusing resources like food and water that could become more scarce in the future. Indeed, the WHO warned last July that almost 690 million people went hungry in 2019, up by 10 million from 2018 and by nearly 60 million over the previous 5 years. And that was before the COVID-19 pandemic, which could push 130 million more people into chronic hunger. Overpopulation was another concern among those surveyed in the new report, with some young adults saying that they felt having more than 2 children would be selfish because they would be over replacing themselves and their partner. What's more, many were considering adoption as a low carbon alternative to starting a family. Is that really what they called it? Finally, many of the young adults choosing to go childless said that uncertainty over the future was also discouraging them from starting families. Oh, I see. The world is a hard place today. I suppose it is, but the world has always been a hard place, full of fear and uncertainty. Many expressed feelings of guilt, as if they would be doing something morally or ethically wrong if they brought babies into a world with such a possibly bleak future, the paper added. But some subjects did express optimism that future generations could make things better, although that would be a heavy burden to place on the next generation. I mean, I suppose this is perhaps the truest measure of how, well, atheism has replaced belief in God. Right at the beginning of the book of Genesis, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply. There doesn't seem to be any evidence, not any evidence that I've seen at any rate, that being deliberately barren leads to greater happiness. It doesn't seem to be that way amongst America and Canada's growing legions of cool wine ants. This is from Paul Bedard at the Washington Examiner. The youth in the dumps more than usual have appeared to have lost faith in the American experiment. Oh, my word, I hate that phrase. And now consider other countries greater. How would they know? In an expansive Harvard University survey of America's 18 to 29-year-olds, 50% declared that there are other countries as great or greater than America, and just 31% said the United States is number one. Young Americans are sounding the alarm when they look at the America they will soon inherit. They see a democracy and climate in peril, and Washington is more interested in confrontation than compromise, said Harvard's Institute of Politics polling director John Della Volpe in releasing Wednesday's survey. It found that a majority believe that democracy is in trouble or failing. And while most young Biden voters are satisfied with their 2020 vote, the president's job approval has dropped 13% to 46% since this school's spring poll. The survey described younger voters as sour on several topics, including climate change policy, and anxious over the nation's divisive politics. It even suggested that they are worried about a new civil war. Young Americans place the chances that they will see a second civil war in their lifetime at 35%, chances that at least one state secedes at 25%. One issue they agree on is the impact of the coronavirus. Over 50% of young Republicans and Democrats said that COVID-19 has had a negative effect on their lives. More than half, 51% of young Americans report having felt down, depressed, and hopeless, and 25% have had thoughts of self-harm at least several times in the last 2 weeks, read the analysis. Well, I've made the comparison between America today and the Soviet Union from 1985 onwards, many times before, that if you go about insisting that your country is evil and always has been evil, how do you think that that is going to affect the people who live in the country, or their willingness to defend it, or their willingness to even care what happens? Again, after Glasnost was introduced in 1985 by Gorbachev, the Soviet Union lasted only 6 more years. As Eric Zemmour would agree, nations need myths. And Americans have seemingly decided, well, the American elite has decided that no. We don't want to hear about Davy Crockett or the ride of Paul Revere or George Washington's cherry tree. No, because those were evil white men, and white men have never accomplished anything, certainly not in America. And, oh yes, just to give you an idea just how crazy my country has become, this is from the Post-Millennial. A federal bank regulator has given a stark warning about the state of the Canadian economy, saying that any decline in housing prices could flatten Trudeau's economy. Currently, mortgage debts are equivalent to over 80% of Canada's economy. That means that a drop in housing prices could have severe implications for the entire country. A long-term trend towards growing household indebtedness persists and may indicate vulnerability in the Canadian economy and the financial system, said the bank regulator's annual report. Despite this, housing prices are on the rise across Canada. This is particularly the case for metropolitan centres. Having said this, Trudeau's Department of Finance has repeatedly dismissed the chances of a Canadian housing crash. Household indebtedness poses the largest risk for many federally regulated financial institutions. COVID-19 created severe pressure on household employment incomes. No, it didn't. The panicked overreaction to it accomplished that. So there's no mention of immigration in this story. And in the next 3 years, the Trudeau government is going to bring over 1.2 million so-called new Canadians. That is to say, permanent residents. And that's not counting all of the people who are here supposedly temporarily, a great many of whom never go home. All of these people have to live somewhere. And typically, they don't want to live in, northern Saskatchewan. They want to live in cities. And I guess, the lobby for, high housing prices will only be happy when no Canadian will be able to afford a place to live. And yeah, the Greta phenomenon. This is about Ryan Maloney at CBC News. A group of young Canadians has launched a court challenge to lower Canada's minimum wage for voting in federal elections. On Tuesday, 13 young people from across the country, ranging in age from 12 to 18, filed an application at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, arguing that the section of the Canada Elections Act which bars Canadians under 18 from voting in federal elections is unconstitutional. The group is making the argument that the rule violates two sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 3, which states that every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election for members of the House of Commons or a legislative assembly, and Section 15, which states that every individual is equal before and under the law. Well, further in Section 15, you have a codicil there that discrimination against white people is acceptable because we have various protected classes of people in Canada, and white people are not one of those protected classes. So much for equality. Amelia Penny Crocker, a 16-year-old from Nova Scotia, got involved in the challenge through Children First Canada, the youth charitable organization backing the effort. Penny Crocker told CBC News that with the planet at a tipping point because of climate change, young people must have the right to weigh in on what needs to be done to tackle the crisis. We have to act now. It's now or never. It's always now or never, isn't it, for people like Amelia Penny Crocker? And I think youth are really actually aware of this much more than adults, because we know that this is our future on the line. Yes, and let's see, Penny Crocker is 16. So let's assume that her parents are 40 years old. Let's just assume that. They wouldn't be worried about their future because they only have like 40 more years to live. What a stupid idea. Of course, lowering the voting age to 18, which was done at pretty much the same time in both Canada and the United States, was a stupid idea as well. But you remember when we were told that COVID-19 was racist? Yeah. And we're still hearing it. Someone called Erica Eiffel writes in the Hill Times, vaccine apartheid spreading the same strain of racism. See, it's a disease. It's a real disease. Not only do Black lives not matter in Canada in interpreting the actions of the Liberal government, they're worth less around the world. And her column begins, tell me anti-Blackness is global without telling me anti-Blackness is global. Okay, I can do that. On November 26, researchers in South Africa detected a new addition to the coronavirus family, a variant called Omicron. It was first detected in Botswana, but identified by South African researchers. Rapid spike in cases in the city of Pretoria. In just 2 short weeks, the variant had reached outbreak status with cases detected in Belgium, Botswana, Germany, Hong Kong, Israel, Italy, and the United Kingdom, meaning it's already on its march towards global domination as the variant of fear for 2022. Variant of fear. Happy New Year. This variant is scarier than Delta. In a primer by Al Jazeera, well, they're the experts, the new Omicron variant is more transmissible than the previous iterations of COVID-19. However, little is known as to how that translates into physical implications as compared to previous variants. Of great concern is the potential for reinfections. The research continues, particularly since South Africa is one of the leading researchers on coronavirus in the world. And then she takes a shot at Canadian science as opposed to South African science. The political response to the detection of Omicron was as expected from the Liberal government's swift and anti-Black by imposing a travel ban on African countries that will do little to stop the spread of the variant. It left out the rich countries, read white, boo, that have also detected the variant. Of the aforementioned countries who detected this strain, only one was hit with the travel ban because only one is in Africa, because only one is a majority Black country. Okay. Oh, abolish the monarchy. Where does that come from? Okay. Never forget that Canada raided the COVAX kitty, right, meant to provide vaccines for those same countries struggling with vaccination rates now. Africa seems to be doing pretty well, COVID-wise. Also India, despite lack of vaccines. Wonder why that is. Perhaps a lack of miasma. Never forget that Canada was the only G7 country to do so, and it was all done for short-term political gain on the backs of Africans' lives. Not only do Black lives not matter in Canada, interpreting the actions of the Liberal government, they're worth even less around the world. Canada, such a horrible place, according to Erica Ifill. So who is this Erica Ifill? Who is she? According to her bio at the National Observer, she is an economist turned entrepreneur who founded her own communications agency, Not in My Color, that uses her decade of experience in developing digital content and communication strategies for businesses and organizations. She is also the co-founder and co-host of the Bad and Bitchy podcast, which discusses political and social issues from an intersectional feminist lens. She's a columnist for the Hill Times, whose additional bylines include the Ottawa Citizen, Policy Options, and the Globe and Mail. Yes, she seems to have many, many sponsors, despite the fact that apparently Canada hates Black people. So I went to the Not in My Color website. Welcome to the new normal. Build a business that's truly equitable. We are an intersectional business consultancy. We create inclusive organizations and implement solutions to dismantle systemic discrimination. Equity is the cornerstone of everything we do. It is what differentiates our work from the status quo approach of most firms. Our advisory services not only solve problems, they implement knowledge and build a learning community for leaders through our masterclass and various workshops. Get educational resources delivered directly to you if you sign up for their newsletter. And Fergus's snub shows that for Black faces, the work is never enough. So some Black person was snubbed. Okay. He wasn't appointed to the cabinet. So that proves that Canada hates Black people. So I gather, if you take your business to Erica Ifill's Not in My Color, she, as a professional Black woman, can give white people absolution. But it's really only kind of a conditional absolution because, as we know, white people are irredeemably evil. Sad, but, true. And in humor news, This is from Adriana Diaz at the Daily Mail. Black Lives Matter has announced its 7th year of boycotting white companies. Boo! During the holiday season to support Black Xmas. On Black Friday, the official Black Lives Matter global network shared an Instagram post calling to support Black-led, Black-serving organizations. We are dreaming of a hashtag Black Xmas. This means no spending with white companies from Black Friday until New Year's Day. The group suggests 3 ways for its supporters to take part in Black Xmas: build black, buy black, and bank black. Why not, Christmas? Do they know that the X, do they use the X because they think that it's cool and mysterious? Do they know about the Cairo? I wouldn't think so. And I'm going to talk about Eric some more briefly, but let's go to the chat first. Pizza? Everyone in this company does nothing of value, says Dr. A Dead Name. Casey's Pizza is respectable, says Che Blutarski. Richard says, I haven't had Casey's Pizza for years, though. Gamian says, went to a black-owned hair salon the other day. I didn't know a gay Latino hair guy gave me a light version of the Karen haircut. I kid you not. Thankfully, it washed away in the shower. Red Sulfur says, BLM Saint Assata Shakur is still living in Cuba, still on the FBI's most wanted list. Matt Beck says, I look forward to my De Hallmarcus cards. Hello, Lamprey Milt, who says, I started smoking a lot more cigarettes since the lockdowns. Went from 1 or 2 before bed to 5 or 6 chain smoking. I feel ashamed about it. Solving problems where none exist is causing problems, says Sea Monkeys. Okay. I thought a Runza was one of those robot vacuum things, says Oscar Toe. Dr. Dead Name says, a content developer. This is getting more confusing. They put ground beef and sauerkraut in Runzas. Okay, more talk about Runzas. Begin reading about the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, another cult, says Chogokin 666. Well, I'm old enough to have been around when that happened. Short version of the story. Black radicals move into a neighborhood. People complain. Nothing is done. People complain. They make warnings. These people are up to no good. They're talking revolution. Nothing is done. And this goes on for several months. And then the city decides to burn down the whole block. Yes, liberalism in action. Dan asks, how can Canada be racist when the Prime Minister is black? Crazy Frog Football Analysis says, I like it when the BBC publishes articles about black people being kept as household slaves in the UK and Australia, etc., but they conveniently fail to mention that they're being kept as slaves by rich blacks. Yes, one of Canada's great Native Indian or Indigenous, as we say, heroes, who has a city named after him, had slaves. He owned slaves. Deft use of the cough button by KMG, says Matt Beck. Remember Fraser Crane's famous echoing cough? Okay, more talk about Runzas. Okay, I have no idea what that is. I have to enjoy corn before Bill Gates replaces all the fields with soy, says Oscar Toe. Chogokin 666 says, I have leftover turkey and ham, and the thought of eating it nauseates me. I used to work in an Italian restaurant, said Richard, and they didn't even use any cheese but Parmesan. Palpicasso 88 agrees with me. 18 is already much too young to vote. I heard that the pizza purist prefers a simple cheese pizza over one with toppings, says Ashimane Bravo. What do they call it? Mariana pizza? It begins with an M. I rather like that. I rather like the thin crust, simple thin crust. Because there's a tendency when eating pizza to forget how heavy it is, so that, I don't know, you have your 2 or 3 slices of pizza and afterwards you feel distinctly Logie. And okay, I find it easier to lay off sweets. It is the salty snacks, pasta, and pizza I find harder to resist, says Anne Run. Okay, so let's talk about the reaction to Eric Zemmour's announcement yesterday that he is running to become president of France. And far right, far right, far right, far right. Do you know that there's only far right politicians and never far left politicians? It's funny, isn't it? There is a hysterical essay at Haaretz by someone called Robert Zaretsky. Eric Zemmour isn't France's Donald Trump. He's far worse. Well, if Donald Trump was, in the famous words of Sarah Silverman, worse than Hitler, and Eric Zemmour is worse than Donald Trump, this is truly frightening. A far-right pundit, vile misogynist, racist conspiracist, and potential contender for the presidency, Zemmour is the Jewish heir to a particularly vicious French brand of anti-Semitic nationalism repurposed to target other minorities. Oh, I see. So he's a Jew, but he's an anti-Semite because he's not too fond of the Muslims they have in France. That's excellent elite logic. He is a diminutive man with towering ambitions that, though he has yet to make an official, no, that's not true. Not anymore. And it turns out that this Zaretsky fellow simply hates France. That's the only lesson that I can take from this. Oh, this is from Rick Nowak at the Washington Post with echo of Trump, wait for it, far-right commentator Eric Zemmour announces his bid to become French president. Oh, and the first paragraph, French far-right provocateur Eric Zemmour Tuesday announced his candidacy for the presidential election in April. In a 10-minute video, Zemmour echoed some of the divisive themes on which he has frequently relied to draw supporters to crowded venues and which have been largely revolved around what he calls France's disastrous path of decline. Zemmour's provocative style, including his recent demands for a ban on foreign-sounding first names, have drawn comparisons to the strategies and sentiments that helped Donald Trump win the U.S. presidency. Throughout the summer, established far-right candidate Marine Le Pen had polled first or second, but in recent weeks, Zemmour has at times come close to matching her numbers, which are now in the mid-teens. If Zemmour builds on his position, that could give him a shot at reaching the second round of the elections and facing off against Macron. But if he hovers around his current levels, he could fracture support for both the mainstream center-right Republicans Party and for Le Pen, potentially elevating Macron or other candidates. Le Pen told French radio, division is not a service to the country. Well, then why don't you drop out of politics? Because partisan politics are based on division. You know that a politician or would-be thinker is absolutely bereft of any kind of thoughts when they say things like division is not a service to the country, or we have to get beyond partisanship. Well, maybe we could just get rid of political parties, then we wouldn't have partisanship anymore. I suspect that Le Pen is envious, or, well, more to the point, jealous, actually. I mean, she has had her shots, and she has failed. Oh, and in the pettiest response, and this is a story from Agence France-Presse, candidates and media firms, including AFP, are among those protesting the use of their images by, wait for it, far-right pundit Eric Zemmour in the short film that announced his run for the presidency. You know, I'm tempted, if I were Zemmour, to make a joke that, I was looking at my birth certificate and looking for the names far right because I'm not seeing it here. And yet these names are always attached to the beginning of my actual name. Zemmour, a 63-year-old writer and TV pundit who declared his candidacy Tuesday, is the most stridently anti-Islam and anti-migrant of the challengers seeking to unseat President Macron in April 22. So Luc Besson appears very upset about this. AFP is very upset about it. Movie production house Gaumont is upset with it because clips from Joan of Arc and A Monkey in Winter were used. Gaumont said that it would study all the options open to us against Zemmour. Rolling News Channel, France 24, said it was opposed on principle to the use of its images and its logo in all political campaigns and would demand their immediate removal. France Télévisions, the National Audiovisual Institute, and Radio France put out a joint statement saying Zemmour must respect the copyright of images just like everyone else. However, a lawyer for Scam, which oversees copyright law in France, I'm not going to say anything about that because the jokes write themselves. Let's take a brief detour here back to Joseph Tainter and the collapse of complex societies. Robert Scherer, 1977, argues that in the Mayan late classic, both population size and socio-political complexity formed an intertwined upward spiral. State control over the economy led to greater efficiency in the production and distribution of food. This then led to larger populations, which in turn required more managerial control. But as population grew, measures taken to increase food production stretched environmental resources to the breaking point. New production systems were vulnerable to climatic shifts, natural disasters, disease and pest problems, and soil exhaustion. The elites compounded the crisis by increasing investment in monumental architecture, thus diverting time and labor from food production. Crop losses due to pests, soil exhaustion, climatic shifts, or some natural disaster combined with an invasion by non-Mayan neighbors led to collapse. Conrad and Demarest have presented, 1984, an important discussion of political and economic weakness in the Aztec and Inca empires. They argued that ideological factors which were beneficial early in the histories of these empires became maladaptive later. For the Aztecs, the cult of Huitzlopochtli demanded human sacrifice to maintain the world and thus spurred militaristic expansion to secure the necessary victims. Among the Inca, property was not inherited by a new emperor. Each ruler continued to be served by his court and retinue even after death, and to command the lands and resources held during life. Since a new ruler thus ascended to the throne without an endowment, continued conquests were necessary to avoid royal poverty. Both ideologies led to expansion, but it became maladaptive when the number of profitable conquests declined. When the ideological system proved difficult to change, civil conflict inevitably followed. Friedman and Reynolds, 1977, propose a model in which competitive feasting in tribal societies gives an incentive for surplus production. By the acquisition of captive external slaves and internal debt slaves, a conical clan forms in which one descent group promotes itself to chiefly rank. The expanding chiefdom, practicing perhaps Swidden agriculture, will inevitably collapse due to declining productivity in an economy, demanding accelerating surpluses. By and large, these failure to adapt arguments are superior in one respect to many considered up until this point. Recognizing that an understanding of collapse often depends more on the characteristics of the society than of its stresses, these authors postulate causal mechanisms such as environmental insufficiency and the law of evolutionary potential to explain why adaptive responses are not made. This is a significant step. Yet as intriguing as some of these explanations are, they seem as a lot to rely on certain assumptions about the nature of complex societies, assumptions that the authors leave implicit. If these assumptions are made explicit, we will find that they give us cause for hesitation. The assumptions seem to revolve around three models of complex societies. For lack of more elegant terms, I will call them the dinosaur model, the runaway train model, and the house of cards model. In the dinosaur model, a complex society is seen as a lumbering colossus, fixed in its morphology and incapable of rapid change. Locked into an evolutionary dead end, It represents an investment in structure, size, and complexity that is awesome and admirable, yet highly maladaptive. When stresses arise, such a society cannot adapt and so must expire. Complex societies, seen thus, present a spectacle of power that evokes both wonder and pity. In colloquial terms, they are all pitiful, helpless giants and are inevitably outcompeted by newer, leaner, more aggressive societies. The dinosaur model, as characterized, is coincident with the law of evolutionary potential, as well as with derivative and similar theories. The argument of this law is that all societies, complex or otherwise, run the risk of adapting so well to existing circumstances that change becomes impossible. Among complex societies, this tendency becomes fatal when newer societies acquire capabilities that the lumbering colossus is incapable of adopting. The runaway train model may be a variant of the dinosaur model, but it has its own distinct characteristics. A complex society is seen as imperiled along a path of increasing complexity, unable to switch directions, regress, or remain static. When obstacles impinge, it can continue in only the direction it is headed, so that catastrophe ultimately results. And I will have more from Joseph Tainter tomorrow. Let's talk about paraphilias. This is a story from Kay Smythe at the National Pulse. We totally stalked them. Teachers reveal their creepy tactics to recruit kids to alphabet people clubs. Leaked materials from the California Teachers Association conference in Palm Springs have shown how teachers are attempting to subvert parents on their children's inclusion in alphabet people clubs, or grooming parlors, as I prefer to call them, and tactics for tracking their internet use. The documentation and audio files from California's largest teachers union meeting at CTA were sent to Abigail Schreier, who confirmed their authenticity with 3 participants from the conference. The event was held from October 29th to 31st, 2021, and entitled 2021 Alphabet People Issues Conference Beyond the Binary, Identity and Imagining Possibilities. Topics range from advising teachers on best practices for subverting parents, handling conservative communities, and discussions of school principles of gender identity and sexual orientation. The workshops provided at the conference encourage teachers to create a safe environment that fosters bravery to explore sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, while others taught teacher on how to form gay-straight alliance clubs, aka grooming parlors, and other forms of alphabet people clubs for middle schoolers. It would seem to me that middle schoolers, that nowhere in the United States of America is sexual activity by middle schoolers legal, but never mind that. In the audio files, a Buena Vista middle school teacher and Alphabet People Club leader, Lori Caldiera, described how the lack of record keeping, which is this record keeping lack is deliberate in order to avoid having to deal with so-called meddlesome parents, allows for a legal loophole so she can lie to parents about their children's whereabouts and attendance of such clubs. Kelly Baraki calls it the Equity Club, or UBU, rather than GSA, in order to further prevent parents from knowing what their child are attending. Bakari spoke of mitigating any decline in Alphabet People Club membership. We started to try and identify kids. When they were doing virtual learning, we totally stalked what they were doing on Google, even when they weren't doing school work. Yeah, well, one day a real rain is going to come. And in related news, this is by a woman who rejoices in the moniker Peachy Keenan at the American Mind, and it's called Baby Book Wars. When the frizzy-haired Marxists at my local library start ranting about seizing the means of production, they're not talking about factories anymore. They're talking about you, your womb, and its output. We have put childless despots like this in positions of authority over our kids. They have cleverly figured out that their great nihilistic cultural project requires your children to see it through to the end, and they are coming for them. You can hear the planes vibrating as the great galloping horde approaches your elementary school. After all, their harebrained schemes will only work if they can fool a large majority of people to do what they say. You, dear reader, are too smart to fall for their lies, but 3-year-olds, those idiots, will believe anything. Just look around. From the outside, these creatures look normal: young bookstore clerks heaping tables full of rainbow flags and Margaret Sanger hagiographies, lumpy school board officials quietly slipping descriptions of extreme bestiality and pornography into middle grade curricula, feminist librarians proudly displaying transgender toddler board books and other government propaganda on the low racks so that the little kids can easily see them. Don't be fooled by a regime functionary's harmless outward appearance. They are harpies who have swooped into every burg and barn. They peer at you through jealous eyes as you push your stroller through the park, rubbing their claws together and snapping their beaks as they hatch their plans to ensnare your kids. When I think of these wretched people, I think of Quentin Blake's drawings for Roald Dahl books like The Witches and the Twits, the evil giants in the BFG, or Giant Peach James's horrible spinster aunts. Dahl knew who the true enemies of children were. He warned us, and yet we still put Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker in charge of everything. Oh, Amazon is recommending a book called It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity for kids as young as 3. In one illustration, an adult holds a baby and says to it, "When you were born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe they got it right." Yes, the baffling mystery of what gender a newborn is, forget it. It's like trying to sex a clam. One day experts may crack the elusive code. The profusion of bullshittery at the local bookstore looks, as the Daily Wire writer Matt Walsh puts it, like signs at an Antifa rally. Board books have ludicrous titles like Woke Baby, Anti-Racist Baby, and A is for Activist. Browsing these modern titles quickly devolves into a horror show. One book called Mama, Why Do You Have to Go to Work? Features a distressing illustration of 2 crying, terrified toddlers on the cover clinging to their mother. Sounds like a heartwarmer. Why Do You Have to Go to Work helps children understand why mom's job is important and how it enriches their time at home together. The book also reminds mothers how remarkable they are at building a career while simultaneously nurturing a family. Hear that? Stop crying, kids. Once they pipe down, you can look forward to helping your kids understand where their little sister went with a medically accurate, non-judgmental, and gender-inclusive resource called What's an Abortion Anyway? Spoiler alert, in this family, they don't all live happily ever after. Oh, Johnny the Walrus is about a little boy who likes to pretend he's a large marine mammal. Naturally, Johnny's imaginative game gets taken too literally by his neurotic mother. There's even a terrifying illustration of a pink-haired, machete-wielding doctor who declares a simple procedure cuts feet into fins. Yes, tear it all down. I don't see efforts at amelioration going anywhere. A disturbing essay from KMG Show favorite Mary Harrington at unheard.com. That's UNHERD.com. It's called Sex Positivity's Hidden Victims. Consent is no protection from evil grooming gangs. Earlier this year, a grooming gang investigation in Hull was closed, having arrested 34 men, but only managed 1 successful prosecution due to lack of evidence. But last week, the gang was in the news again after a girl reported being raped by 150 men from her early teens onward. It's triggered a renewed wave of fury and calls to declare war on this seemingly intractable scourge. Whenever these gangs reappear in public view, responses tend to fall into 2 categories. The first laments the youth and vulnerability of the victims and wonders which public sector measures could be implemented to stop such things happening again. The second type points out that the safeguarding lot are keen to talk about anything but the ethnic disparity between the victims, usually young, white, and working class, and the rapists, usually of South Asian heritage, although not exclusively Muslim. The implication is usually that if we only stopped bowing to political correctness and allowing mass immigration into the country, nothing like this would ever happen. One side blames poverty, inadequate sex education, and institutional safeguarding failures, the other immigration and political correctness. But there's another aspect that neither side wishes to acknowledge. That is, a subset of adult men takes an intense sexual interest in very young girls. This isn't specific to one culture or ethnicity. Today's report from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial describes the grooming and abuse of a 14-year-old in a setting with different sociocultural traits and far more money, but which otherwise follows much the same pattern as that suffered by the girls in Hull and other UK towns. And we've embraced a culture that normalizes extreme and kinky forms of sexual self-expression, including for adolescents, while our medical, legal, and cultural frameworks blur the official age of consent. Taken together, this results in a culture where even lovingly parented and closely supervised girls routinely encounter opportunistic pervs. Meanwhile, girls who are neglected, unloved, or otherwise vulnerable are left with few defenses against their attention. Why do neither the anti-immigration side nor the safeguarding hand-wringers want to confront this? Because sexual freedom is of net benefit to everyone who's already empowered, including most of the angry editorial writers on both sides. This worldview holds that all forms of sexual activity are legitimate, and our freedoms on this front should be constrained only by consent. Perhaps the central contributor to this worldview is the cultural theorist and pedophile Michel Foucault, who made the case in History of Sexuality that there are no sexual crimes as such. Rather, there are only acts that we choose to construct as harmful. Foucault took this up to the point of suggesting that children can, in some circumstances, participate in sexual activity without being harmed. We find traces of this argument in, for example, the 70s campaign to cut the age of consent to 14, which actually happened in Canada, by the way, or in some circumstances 10. It was subsequently raised again by the Harper government to 16. Further traces can be found in the Gillick versus Wisbeck 1986 legal case that blurred the legal age of consent by establishing doctors' right to prescribe contraceptives to girls under 16 without their parents' knowledge, where the girl was deemed mature enough. Even as Foucault blurred questions of childhood sexuality in Gillick, opened the door to doctors condoning so-called safe underage sex, pop culture was full of the voices of men pushing at legal restrictions on sexualizing under 16. It was in 1981 when Ted Nugent released the song Jailbait, which includes the line, "I don't care if you're just 13. There are plenty more such works." As an adolescent in the 1990s, I recall being beeped by van drivers for some time before 16. In 2002, a 15-year-old Charlotte Church took legal action against a website which was counting down the days until she turned 16 and could legally have sex. And a quick straw poll of my Twitter followers asking for recollections of when they began to be hit on by adult men returned hundreds of replies, giving an average age of 10 to 12. Would even more men be willing to admit desiring very young girls if it weren't frowned upon? One study showed that men took longer to admit finding a female image attractive. He'd been told she was 14 or 15. This suggests that, unsurprisingly, men are more hesitant to give expression to desires they know are socially unacceptable. And the flip side of this is that implicitly, we should make sure men are vigorously encouraged to go on repressing these darker desires. Studies show porn use normalizes violent sexual scripts for boys, while for girls, pornography use is associated with participating in group sex, either voluntarily or coerced, and also agreeing to unwanted sex acts. Presumably, these register as consensual and are therefore valid and empowering. And yes, so what is to be done? That repression is a good thing. That is the moral of this story. Repression is the basis of civilization. In fact, even Sigmund Freud agreed with that. Mary Harrington has a Twitter account, which is at Move in Circles. And she seems to be one of these people like J.K. Rowling that since she has so-called controversial opinions such that there are women and men are not women, Um, she keeps getting messages from people. Oh, just, you just don't get it, do you? You don't get it at all. An actual tweet. Some women have penis. Oh, here we go. Matt Dillahunty had tweeted, then you're not paying attention. Some people with penises are women. Some people with penises aren't. If it's a women's space, these women with penises should be included. Harrington responded, I don't believe in anything religious or supernatural except the self-evident reality of an unfalsifiable, insubstantial, magic gender essence that somehow transcends and supersedes biological sex. I am very clever. Yes, I'm going to be going to Belated Music Monday very shortly. There is an essay by Chloe Lemaster in Evie, spelled Evie, or EVMagazine.com, The Rise of the Soft Boy and the Fall of Masculinity. Harry Styles, Timothée Chalamet, and Jared Leto, the list of male celebrities getting their kicks from their feminine energy is constantly growing. Well, it seems fairly obvious, at least to me, that Timothée Chalamet and Harry Styles are homosexuals who are pretending not to be homosexuals. Oh, I just like dressing up like a woman repeatedly. Well, always, actually, because it's so liberating, or some such thing. And of course, there's the infamous Vogue cover with Harry Styles dressed up as a woman and for some reason blowing a balloon, because that's what women do. They blow balloons. I guess so. Finally, as in the paraphilia file, we have this from Samir Suri for the Daily Mail. We make great artists. Euphoria's Hunter Schafer talks about being trans in the acting world as she goes braless in sheer top for Harper's Bazaar. Yeah, you can see where this is going, right? There are an awful lot of misogynists in Hollywood, and I mean that genuinely. So how about if they can just eliminate women from acting entirely and replace them with men who have somehow miraculously become women, even if a lot of them seem to have penises? This would be the final solution to the women problem in Hollywood. So let's have a look at the chat, and then I'm off to talking about Mark E. Smith and the fall. And, more discussion about cheese. Oscar Toe says, somehow in old literature, older men married 16-year-old girls and they did not have internet porn, so I don't know about this lady's theory. Well, any age of consent is going to be an arbitrary number, but it's clearly based on the assumption, which it seems to me true, that there is a rapid sexual maturation and emotional maturation in adolescent women. Palcasso 88 says, Kevin, Rick Beato just interviewed Sting. What do you think of Sting and the Police? Yeah, I like the Police. Or just, and you reminded me of an Alan Partridge joke that he played something by Sting. And no, he said, and that was by the Police, or as they're now known, Sting. It was a good interview. Beato couldn't quite pin him down on music theory, though, says Pitsky. Will you cover the 30th anniversary of U2's Octung Baby, Brian Eno at his finest? I can't abide U2. Or Bono, as they're called now. The atheism was washed up by Occupy Wall Street. After that, they were switched 24/7 race politics, says Hauper. Ashimane Bravo says, I saw a hilarious meme of fundamentalist Baptists who prohibit dancing and who drink grape juice as a sacrament because alcohol is prescribed. Yes, I have run into these people. No, Jesus wasn't really drinking wine, turning water into wine. It was grape juice. I guess that's why the multitudes were there, because people love grape juice so much. But you must know the old joke. I apologize if you've heard it, which you probably have. Why do Baptists hate sex? because it might lead to dancing. Bada-bump. Anwin says, unfair. Copeland and Summers are both talented musicians. They're superb musicians. I'm not doubting that. Not doubting that at all. Why do English folks generally hate Sting and Dire Straits, says Don Willis. Perhaps Peter Hitchens said that he'd never heard of Dire Straits. And we kept hearing about this band. He'd never heard of their music. And I thought, you were around in England in the media in the 1980s and you'd never heard of Dire Straits? Maybe it's, oh, you're English, so you must like Dire Straits or Sting. I used to watch Matt Dillahunty's atheism show on YouTube back during the golden age of new atheism on YouTube circa late 2000s and early to mid 2010s. Professional atheist, huh? Oh, we're talking about Sting because of that song, Don't Stand So Close to Me. I get it. Okay. Luke Ford just uploaded a short video titled The Importance of a Co-Host. All right. Okay. Australian Member of Parliament George Christensen went on Alex Jones's show today to talk about the medical tyranny going on in Australia, says Ashley Main Bravo. Nothing says my type of leader like a 63-year-old far-right guy that the media hates. Indeed. And okay, Sting went to the same high school as that guy from the Pet Shop Boys. Thomas Dolby went to the same high school as the members of Radiohead. Of course, you're going to see a lot of that in England. Abingdon School is called. Okay. So we're going to talk about a cult band here called The Fall, named after a novel by Camus. And Mark E. Smith, I should note that this is not common. It's exceedingly rare in England, a violation of naming conventions, that the English do not use middle initials, except that Mark E. Smith did. And he was a great reader. He was a high school dropout, but a great reader, which might have something to do with the fact that a lot of critics love Marky Smith and The Fall. And yeah, well, John Peel, of course, he said that Teenage Kicks was his favorite song, but that his favorite band was The Fall. They're pretty wide-ranging taste there in John Peel. I remember David Wisdom, who for many years hosted a late-night CBC music program, which I quite enjoyed. He always used to say that The Fall was his favorite band. So, Mark E. Smith was born in 1957 and died in 2018. His death attributed to what? Liver, lung, and kidney cancer. He was a passionate smoker and drinker. And he had, it's funny, there's so many songs by The Fall which mention drinking in them. I guess you write about what you know. Isn't that correct? I suppose it is. But Marky Smith, he hated people who drank alone. And he made a claim in an interview that if you drink in public, you won't become an alcoholic. And I thought, that would have been news to, say, Jeffrey Bernard or Kingsley Amos, who were dedicated pub men. But where does the Fall story begin? Well, it begins with one of the most legendary concerts in English history. And it was in the summer of 1976, the 4th of June. I was present at another legendary concert, took place in London, at a place called the Roundhouse. Exactly 1 month later, where the Ramones and the Stranglers played. They were backing up a band from San Francisco called the Flamin' Groovies. Now, the number of people who claim to have been at that Roundhouse concert is very much larger than the number of people who could have possibly been squeezed into that space. Similarly, there was the same bands played at a nightclub, one in Kentish Town the next night. I was there. And again, the number of people who claimed to have been there many times more than could actually be squeezed into that space. David Nolan, author of I Swear I Was There, Sex Pistols, Manchester, and the Gig That Changed the World, has spent decades tracking down the audience of the legendary gig the Sex Pistols played in Manchester in the summer of '76. When about 40 people saw the Sex Pistols at the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester on June the 4th, 1976, they came away inspired. But they were inspired in a very Mancunian kind of way. Many people in the audience that night didn't look at the Pistols and so much think, I want to do that. But instead, they looked at the young Londoners and thought, come on, I could do way better than that. It's thanks to that very Mancunian approach that we have some of the most thrilling music of the last 40 years. The creativity that sprang from the Lesser Free Trade Hall would loom large over the Manchester scene for decades without that June the 4th gig. And the Pistols' return visit 6 weeks later, there would be no Buzzcocks magazine, Joy Division, New Order, Factory Records, no Indie Scene, no The Fall, The Smiths, Hacienda, Manchester, Happy Mondays, or Oasis. I think then about the ripples of inspiration that came as a result of these bands and situations that sprang from those gigs. Maybe there would be no Nirvana, no Green Day, no Suede, no Killers, no Arctic Monkeys, no Interpol or Savages, no Blur, no Pavement, no Radiohead, Prodigy, no Arcade Fire. And yes, too funny. You see, if you drink in public, you will never become an alcoholic. I suppose you could say that that Marky Smith was a shambolic man, and perhaps a little touched. Men like that, particularly if they have fame or notoriety, are catnip to a certain type of woman. And one of those women was called Brix. She's now called Brix Smith Start, and she played guitar and was a songwriter in the Fall. And she has a memoir, and it's pretty funny. In May 1983, this is from Sean O'Hagan at The Guardian. Brix Smith, then age 20, arrived in Manchester, a Californian by birth and disposition. Her first impressions of the city were not favorable. The buildings, she writes in her entertainingly bonkers memoir, The Rise, the Fall, and the Rise, looked like mean structures where horrible atrocities had been committed. The sky was toxic, the people were joyless, their clothes drab. As a taxi took her towards Prestwich, where the man she had fallen for just 6 weeks earlier lived, he pointed out the local landmarks. Look, Brixie, there's the Boddington's Brewery. There's Strangeways Prison. Entering the lobby of his building, she was struck by the dirt on the walls and the strong odor of urine. In his flat, there were cats everywhere and items of unwashed underwear belonging to his ex-girlfriend. As they sat down for a cuppa, he reached out onto the window ledge for the pint of milk that sat there alongside a pack of back bacon, a carton of eggs, and a Hovis loaf. I was incredulous, she writes. Perhaps this was a traditional, resourceful British custom. Yeah, she was married to him, and then when she got divorced, well, she left the band. And I don't know whether there's an exact number, but I've seen estimates of, well, actually a number as high as 66 of the number of people who were members of the Fall. Now, Brix went on to marry Nigel Kennedy, the classical musician. And Kennedy is amusing to me because he was a very nice suburban boy who went to Yehudi Menuhin's school in Switzerland. And then, I don't know, one day decided he was Johnny Rotten with his spiky hair and I'm going to play Jimi Hendrix on the violin. And oh, yes, I'm at war with traditional classical music. Well, Brix says that she was once in a limousine or a Rolls or something like this with Nigel Kennedy, and as a joke, Kennedy attempted to turn the vehicle onto its side, to the consternation of her and the other passengers. But as they say, horses for courses, right? So Marky Smith founded the Fall in 1976, shortly after that famous Sex Pistols gig, and they started playing music right away. So influences, well, I guess you could say the Motoric. Motoric was a very big influence, and they got their Motoric, it would seem, not through Kraftwerk, but through Can. And there is a song by the Fall called I Am Damo Suzuki, which is a reference to their second and final vocalist, who was found busking on the street and invited to appear at a sold-out concert that very evening, despite not really being fluent in German and singing in a strange mixture of English, Japanese, and something that was completely made up. He made great records with Can, and then one day was converted, I guess, on the street by a Jehovah's Witness and left. So yeah, you can see Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. The Fall was a primitive band. So what kind of primitive rock band you're going to graduate to? Well, it'd be the Stooges, wouldn't it? That would be the band that would influence you. But let's look at his Mark Smith's lyrical style. One of their first songs, Totally Wired. I'm totally wired, totally wired. I'm totally wired. Can't you see? Totally wired. Ah, can't you see? A butterfly stomach, round ground. I drank a jar of coffee and then I took some of these, and I'm totally wired. Ah, life leaves you surprised, slaps you in the eyes. If I was a communist, a rich man would ball me. The opposite applies. The morning light, another fresh fight, another row, right. And I'm totally wired. I'm totally biased. Can't you see? I'm totally wired. You don't have to be weird to be wired. You don't have to be an American brand. You don't have to be strange to be strange. You don't have to be weird to be weird, but I'm totally wired. My heart and I agree. I'm irate, peeved, bad state, because I'm totally wired. Repeat, and I'm always worried. Repeat. Marky Smith said in an interview that he didn't like songwriters like Bruce Springsteen because he thought that they were trying too hard to be literary, and he thought that that was boring. He also said in interviews that he thought that the whole point of being in the business that he was in was to be rebellious, to cock a snook at what was considered respectable. And Marky Smith, a genuine English eccentric. Of course, the problem with eccentrics, as many people had the experience with Marky Smith, that eccentrics are often, unpleasant to be around. Let's see. He says in an interview, I find it really boring to be like Bruce Springsteen. You can see in his writing, he's so closeted by having to be a good writer. Dylan is the same as well. It just becomes rubbish after a while. The nearest I could compare it to is Colin Wilson, the writer. You ever heard of him? And the interviewer says, Colin Wilson, wow. And Smith says, yeah, that's the nearest thing. If you know what Wilson does, because that's what he does do in a way, like he'll write a science fiction book, but it's not really about science fiction. And the interviewer says, or maybe it'll start as a science fiction book and turn into something else. I don't know to what extent Colin Wilson has an audience now, but he was a dropout and an autodidact, just like Marky Smith. So you can see the attraction there. And Wilson, his biggest success was with his first book, which was an absolute sensation, and it was called The Outsider, which was published by Victor Gollancz in 1956. Now, that was a propitious time to write a book about the outsider, because people were deciding in England, young men were deciding, no, they wanted to be outsiders. They didn't want to be part of the establishment. The establishment was fusty and corrupt. Colin Wilson, he wrote a great many books following. None were as successful as The Outsider. But Wilson, I suppose you see a typical autodidact. I have figured out how the world really works based on my extensive reading or reading of food labels. Eat yourself fitter, which was a slogan for a band of breakfast cereal. According to a website devoted to Marky Smith, is a slogan used to sell Kellogg's all-brand breakfast cereal. This particular ad campaign seems to have begun sometime prior to 1982. The TV campaign for all brand in area test at the time went national from July 1982. And let's see, eat yourself fitter. Are you attacking health food freaks? He was asked by an interviewer. And Smith replied, it's like a journal, really, a very me journal, all sorts of things I had to go on at that. You didn't get the name off the back of an all-brand packet? And Brick says, no. Smith says, I didn't write it like that. No, I'd never seen that until I'd written the song. I must have seen the television advert or sumat to get the name. I thought it was a unique name. Strange that, isn't it? Somebody showed me. I hope they sue us. And if you thought that the first Totally Wired had strange lyrics, well, this one has its beat. I'm in the furniture trade, got a new job today, couldn't stick the cretin on the number 3 lathe. Went down the town to an HM club. The sign had a cross. Through a couple well-dressed, they looked at my coat, they looked at my hair. An Easy Rider coot grabbed the edge of my coat, said, you're too smart for here. I said, I'll see. The manager. He was the manager. Eat yourself fitter. Up the stairs, mister. Eat yourself fitter. Analytics have got my type worked out. Analytics on me, their poison render. I grope about, and when I go out, my mind splits. My eyes doth hurt. The musical chairs have been swallowed up by a cuddly group who land and rub off, hoping that whatever it is will land and drop off. I met a hero of mine. I shook his hand, got trapped in the door, felt a fool, I'll tell you. Became a recluse and bought a computer, set it up in the home, saw the Holy Ghost, I swear, on the screen, elusive big one on the screen. And then, where's the cursor? Where's the eraser? Where's the cursor? Where's the eraser? And then completely from left field, the Kevin Ayers scene, south of France, crushed velvet, are back. Levi's Fridays, Greek holidays, Barrett Heritance. Now, Kevin Ayers, who was a big fan of in the 1970s, was one of the original members of the band Soft Machine. And after he left, they went jazz and he went art pop. This is the Canterbury scene that we're talking about. Ayers had grown up in Malaya, and he loved the sun. He loved the warmth. So when he returned to England, I don't think that he was ever comfortable there, really. And so he moved to Spain, to Ibiza, and he later lived in southern France. And he worked with David Bedford and Lol Coxhill. Mike Oldfield played bass for him, and he later made a record. It was supposed to make him a star. It was a concert in what's it, June 1st, 1976. That's fateful year again. And it's got Nico and John Cale on it, and pretty much every famous session guy in England played on it. It did not make Kevin Ayers a star, but yeah, it's just so funny to me that apparently Marky Smith was thinking one day, and oh yeah, Kevin Ayers. Remember that? Kevin Ayers was famously handsome and successful with women. I recall reading the gossip section in the New Musical Express one day, and they said that a shocking thing was observed at a club where Kevin Ayers failed to pull. Yes, that's how he pulled John Cale's wife the day before the concert. And there is a strange photograph of the group. Brian Eno is there too. And John Cale is looking at Kevin Ayers seemingly with intense hatred, because just before the concert, he discovered that his wife had committed adultery with Kevin Ayers. And so there are, I don't know, 1,000 Fall albums. No, there's not 1,000 of them. There are just so very many of them. And the first one is called Live at the Witch Trials. And there was a sort of, I don't know, how would you say, kind of a cult quality to the Falls' work, at least in their early years. But one of the extras on the reissued album is a song called Bingo Master's Breakout. Again, absolutely singular. Two swans in front of his eyes, colored balls in front of his eyes. It's number 1 for his Kelly's eye, treble 6 right over his eye, a big shot's voice in his ears, words of silence in his ears. All the numbers account for years, checks the card through eyes of tears. Bingo Master's Breakout. All he sees is the back of chairs, in the mirror, a lack of hairs, a lighted room, checks fill out. Here the players all shout, Bingo Master's Breakout. A glass of lager in his hand, a silver microphone in his hand, wasting time and numbers and rhymes, a one-hand drug and faces bright. Bingo Master's Breakout. Came the time he flipped his lid, Holiday in Spain fell through. Players put it down to Bingo Master's Breakout. A hall full of cards left unfilled. He ended his life with wine and pills. There's a grave somewhere only partly filled. A sign in graveyard on a hill reads Bingo Master's Breakout. I don't, if it was a question of what record to recommend, I don't know that I could do that. Because what was it that John Peel said about the Fall? That they were always the same, but always different. And the band, well, it was Marky Smith and whoever was willing to put up with him and play with him. And so I guess you can just dip in anywhere, actually. But let's see, what would be a particularly representative one that was successful? Oh my God, all of this Hex Induction Hour, perhaps from 1982, or no, not another live album. Oh my word. Perverted by Language from 1983. Yes, this is the first Bricks album. So those are my thoughts on. Oh, one last thing about Marky Smith. Again, in 1976, Julie Burchill started writing for the New Musical Express, and Julie Burchill thoroughly angered or irritated Marky Smith because she put it about how much she hated Johnny Cash, and Marky Smith said that Johnny Cash is quite special to me and many of the people that I No. So, I really like the Batman song by Prince, says Oscar Toe. Pilsner Trail, says a Zero a Doc. Does MES ever say anything funny, nasty about Tony Wilson? I don't know. One of the articles that I was looking at was talking about the sentimentality of Wilson regarding the Manchester scene. Now, if you've seen 24-hour Party People, you know that movie makes a joke of Ian Curtis's death. How about that? That doesn't strike me as being particularly sentimental. Yes, Richard Witts rejects the mythologizing of Tony Wilson's Factory Records and Joy Divisions in the era that spawned the fall. Manchester's reign in the early 90s receives contempt for its exclusion of the fall from its narrative. This book aims to restore the fall to a scenario less council flat and more urban modernist. Kate Hannon's account of the band's Mancunian roots circles this editorial attempt without ever pinpointing what makes Smith's embattled, beloved north side of the city so different from the south side that Factory and Wilson championed. Oh, too posh, were they? Yes, one of the members of Joy Division was from Salford. Yeah, that's a lot to be forgiven, I suppose, to the class warriors of the pop music biz. Okay, philosophically, he opposed complexity in music, at least for rock, says Zero Doc. He was infamous for ordering his musicians to simply repeat and not let up. Live, he'd unplug them. He'd unplug them spontaneously to mix it up. Is Joy Division the new retro incel band? I don't know. It's certainly banned from musos. You know, on the one hand, Ian Curtis died at such a young age, and they made 2 records. I can't really see Joy Division going down that road for much longer. Okay, yes, this is the gloomiest pop music, possibly with the exception of Nico, that has ever been recorded. We get it. Okay. And coming from the place that they did, if they had changed, it would be, like Nick Drake, recording Happy Shiny People or something. People would have been appalled. A joke, says Anran. I don't know about that. Maybe it isn't treated as it is in Control. I'll agree with that. I'll have to watch it again. I like the bass in some of Joy Division, says Oscar Toe. Well, Peter Hook is on the short list of famous people who have communicated with me via Twitter. Yeah, that's quite pleasing. Also, Whit Stillman. How about that, huh? This is with regard to Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Who else? Philip Glass. How about that? Now they would have evolved even with Curtis, says Andron. Yes, big catchy disco music. Bass often drove the melody in a fall song, says Glib Medley. Yeah, that's what Mark E. Smith said. Kevin is now practically best friends with Whit Stillman, says Andron. No, he just liked something that I had said or agreed with something that I'd said on a Twitter. What if Sting had a sit-down internet chat with William Shakespeare? Well, that's really something for someone like Sting to go out of his way to put himself out to, promote the music of John Dowland. That's impressive, I think. Okay. He makes a brief cameo in 24-hour Party People. Yeah, who was it? The singer for Magazine, Howard Devoto, shows up as a janitor in a washroom, and then there's a suggestion that he slept with Tony Wilson's wife or something like that. And Devoto says, I definitely don't remember that happening. Again, it doesn't sound all that sentimental to me. The thing that, of course, I miss about that and in Control is Annick Honoré, the Belgian journalist that Ian Curtis was committing adultery with. Neither of the movies mention the nickname that she was given by the rest of the band, which was the Belgian Boiler. Boiler doesn't mean bunny boiler. It just means woman or wife. Do you like the band Orange Juice, says Andron? Indeed, I do. Indeed, I do. What are your thoughts on Hook leaving New Order? I don't know whether these guys liked each other very much, or their singer, you know, the fellow who plays the guitar, and there's 3 different versions of his name, something like that. He seems a very strange person. It's going to be difficult to get along with. Speaking of Nick Lowe's Cruel to Be Kind was a decent pop hit. Well, I love Nick Lowe. And again, I'm going to do name dropping now. I once spent an hour at the 100 Club discussing stuff with Nick Lowe, which was very nice of him because, he didn't know me from Adam. Okay, so that's it for today's show. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be discussing a movie about motorsports, which is called Ford versus Ferrari. Very, very exciting movie. But of course, as we were reminded by a woman at Bloomberg, it's about evil white men from the 1960s with their horrible accomplishments and wanting to be the best at what they do. So they're better off dead. Yes, a columnist for Bloomberg actually wrote that about Ford versus Ferrari. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing Jacques Barzun's Magisterial from Dawn to Decadence. And on next Music Monday, December the 6th, I'm going to be discussing the career of Kurt Weill from Berlin to New York. So that's it. Thank you all for tuning in. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated in these days of impermanence. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Oh, Jim Smith points out that Acme, that's what it was nicknamed. Acme's album's actual title is June the First Night. No, 1974. Yes, of course. Yes, if you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.